Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. You know, there are many ways to set up emulators on Windows, and today I'm going to show you what I think is probably the easiest method. We're going to use an app called Retrobat. This is an all-in-one solution, so all you have to do is just download it, install it, and then add all of your games. From there, you're going to get a nice emulation station style user interface that is totally customizable. In addition, it integrates all of your emulators into one and also configures them for you as well. And so the way I see it, if you want to add some emulation to your Windows PC, this is probably the easiest route to go. And so in this video, I'm going to walk you through the entire process from start to finish to help you get up and running. We got a lot of ground to cover, so grab a snack and drink and let's go ahead and get started. Okay, let's start by discussing Retrobat and all the other options that we have when it comes to emulation and why I think this is one of the easiest to use. Now, the number one thing that defines Retrobat is that it is made for a Windows computer. There are many other solutions that are found on Linux. For example, Batocera is a custom Linux-based operating system that will run on your computer. However, setting up something like Batocera can be a little bit complicated because it requires you to flash this operating system into its own storage. And last year I made a video about this. This is also a great way to go if you want a dedicated retro gaming machine. There are other similar Linux-based operating systems like Bazzite and Chimera OS. These are more gaming-centric, but you can also set them up with emulation too. However, in this video, we're not going to go into the weeds and set up an entire operating system. Instead, we're just going to set up an app that will run our emulators. In other words, you'll be able to do all the Windowsy things you want to do on a computer. For example, you can pull up your spreadsheets or maybe jump onto Microsoft Teams. We're not going to take any of that stuff away. We're just adding the emulators to it. And like I mentioned, I think that Retrobat is one of the easiest ways to go about it, but there are other ways you can do this on Windows. The most straightforward way would just be to download the emulators, then configure them yourself. For example, if you wanted to play GameCube or Wii games, you can just go onto the Dolphin website, download the Dolphin emulator, and then play them from there. However, setting up multiple emulators like that can get quite complicated because they each run in their own different way. Now, you could also throw another app on top of that called Emulation Station Desktop Edition, and this will essentially be able to corral all those emulators together. And this will give you an end product very similar to Retrobat, but will require a lot more configuration than what we're going to do today. Another option on Windows is EmuDeck. This was originally made for the Steam Deck, but they have a Windows installation option as well. This will allow you to integrate your retro games directly into your Steam interface. And I've also made video guides about this, I'll leave it linked down below, but this is more about setting up retro games within Steam. And then finally, there are a couple other options within Windows. For example, this one called Play Night. This one functions as a front end and a game organizer, but it's more dedicated to things like PC games. So it will take your Steam and your Epic Game Store libraries and put them together. It does have a feature that will allow you to integrate emulators as well, but it is a little bit complex. And then finally, we also have Launchbox, which is very similar to Play Night, but more emulation focused. And again, here the configuration is a little bit more complex than what we're going to be doing here today with Retrobat. And so long story short, if we were trying to emulate games within Windows, I think that Retrobat is probably the easiest way to go. This is going to be a single-click download and it'll pre-configure all the emulators for you. Now, as we get started, the number one thing that you're going to need is a computer. And of course, the best computer that you could use is going to be the one that you already have. Now, if you are looking to pick up a computer specifically for Windows-based emulation, then I do have a couple suggestions. The first is going to be this little guy here. This is from a company called Morphine, who I don't actually think are making mini PCs anymore. I picked this up about a year ago. Either way, the most important thing about this one is the chipset. So this is running the Intel N100 CPU. This is a lightweight budget CPU that can do pretty well when it comes to emulation. You can play up through GameCube and PS2 on this. But I actually tried to go on Amazon the other day and find one of these, and I couldn't. I think that they're just not on Amazon anymore. Thankfully, there are many other mini PCs with this exact same configuration. For example, this one here from GMK Tech is actually the exact same thing, but with a different shell. And you can see the price here is pretty reasonable for a dedicated little PC. It's about 150 bucks. And that's about the going rate that you can expect with an N100 mini PC. However, one thing of note, if you are going to pick up one of these, make sure that you get one that has DDR5 RAM. That RAM speed is going to be a little bit faster, and that's really going to help when it comes to PS2 and GameCube. The amount of RAM doesn't really matter all that much. I would just say get at least 8 gigs, but 12 to 16 gigs would be even better. Now, if you're looking to emulate some of the higher end systems or maybe do some PC gaming as well, then I would recommend something a little bit more robust. And there are a ton of options within the mid-range mini PC space, but I think the thing you should be looking for is a Radeon 680M internal graphics card. And the starting spot for that are going to be Ryzen 6000 CPUs like what is found in this mini PC right here. And this is also from that same company we were just talking about, GMK Tech. This model is called the M7, and they have two different models, the M7 and the M7 Pro. The M7 is going to be somewhere between $350 and $400, and it's going to run with a Ryzen 6850H CPU, which has that same internal graphics card. Now they also offer a Pro model, which is going to have the 6950H CPU, so very similar but a little bit more powerful. And this one will be a little bit more expensive, about $500 in this case after we apply that $35 coupon. Now in full disclosure, this company, GMK Tech, offered to send me out one of these PCs to work on a project build. And so this was sent over for review, but as always, all opinions are my own. They're not seeing this video ahead of time, and no money was exchanged in any way. Now there's a few reasons why I thought this computer would be a good fit for using it with Retrobat. And a lot of that comes down to the fact that for the price, this is probably one of the best PCs that you can get when it comes to both PC gaming and emulation. In addition, I like the fact that the M7 line is expandable because it has an Oculink port. This is a high-speed port that is often used with external graphics cards. And so in addition to using those integrated graphics that we were talking about before, you could also plug this into a GPU and then get it boosted even more. And so here as an example, I plugged it into the latest Minis Forum external GPU. And so now all my games are going to run through that graphics card on their way to the monitor, and it's going to really improve performance. As a quick demonstration, here is Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart just using the computer, so without the external graphics card. And the performance on its own is really impressive. Like I mentioned, that Radeon 680M is pretty beefy. This game is running at 1080p low settings with FSR enabled, and I'm still getting well over 30 frames per second almost the entire time. So this is a game that I think would be completely playable with these settings locked at 30 frames per second. Meanwhile, with the external GPU, we can beef things up quite a bit. So we can run this at 1440p in medium settings with no FSR, and we're getting around 40 frames per second. And so I like the fact that this mini PC has that external GPU upgrade possibility if you ever want to go down that route. Another thing I like about the M7 is that it's very easy to get in and change out any of the components. The top acrylic shell will just twist right off, and then from there you can just use a screwdriver to open the rest up. We've also got some pretty good standard components, including crucial DDR5 RAM. The M.2 storage is also from a brand called Zetastone, and then they also have Intel Wi-Fi 6 internal chips. And then finally, it's also got two M.2 storage bays, which means that you can expand the storage really easily. And so all things considered, I think this is a pretty good mini PC when it comes to the I.O. and the components, as well as the fact that it has Oculink. It's also relatively small. It's about 2.5 sticks of Kerrygold butter, or, just a little bit smaller than an Xbox controller. Now you might be wondering whether or not I prefer the M7 or the M7 Pro based on the fact that it's about a $130 difference between the two. And personally, I would say only go for the M7 Pro if you want that increased RAM and internal storage. For example, if you plan on using this mini PC for things like video editing or making music, then it might be better to have these 32 gigs of RAM. But when it comes to gaming, because they have the exact same internal GPU, I don't think you're going to see much of a difference at all. In fact, my best friend TechDweeb just recently did a video about these two mini PCs. And in that video, he compared them head to head and actually had some pretty unique findings. And what I found most interesting is that he only saw an increase of about 3 frames per second with many games. And I think this makes sense because a lot of the time when it comes to PC gaming, it's going to be more GPU reliant than the CPUs. The difference in CPU power is really not going to make that much of a difference when it comes to actually playing games. And so when it comes to these M7 models, I would say, yeah, get the cheaper model unless you need that extra RAM for other work or you also want to have additional storage. But I think when it comes to PC gaming, it's going to be pretty similar between the two. Even games you wouldn't probably expect to be able to play on a $370 PC, like Cyberpunk 2077, or even Baldur's Gate 3, these can work, but you will have to make some adjustments to the settings. Long story short, for the price of $370, I think you're getting a lot of mini PC. Anyway, I think we've covered PCs enough at this point. Let's now talk about the other thing you'll need to be able to run Retrobat, and that's going to be a controller. And you've got many different options to choose from, but let me highlight 4 of these real quickly. Now to start, if you only plan on playing retro games, things like Nintendo and Super Nintendo, stuff like that, then I would recommend the 8BitDo SN30 Pro. This one's shaped like a Super Nintendo, but has all the inputs you could need, including shoulders and triggers, as well as dual analog sticks. And I found this is always one of my favorite ways to play some of those older consoles, so if you're only looking for that stuff, then I would recommend this one. Now, if you're looking for a bit more of a modern setup, say for example you're going to be playing a lot of PS2, then maybe something like the Ultimate 2C from 8BitDo might be better. This one uses a 2.4 GHz USB dongle, which means you can plug it directly into your PC and it'll automatically connect. Now it is quite limited, so you wouldn't be able to use this, for example, on a Nintendo Switch, but for $30 I don't think it's bad at all. Another controller I recently reviewed is this one from Ambernic called the PG01, and this one also costs around $30 after shipping and has that USB dongle as well. But the thing that separates this one is that it's also Bluetooth capable, so you can use it on a Nintendo Switch or like your phone or tablet. And then finally, another similar controller is the GameSir Nova Lite. This one's only 25 bucks. This one is also very similar in terms of functionality to the Anbernic one, but I would say this one feels a little bit more cheap. And it's also worth noting that your console controllers can connect to your PC. So if you have an Xbox or PS4 or PS5 controller, these will all connect via Bluetooth to your computer, so you can just use this instead. With all that out of the way, let's get to the fun stuff, which is going to be to install and configure Retrobat. And first thing we need to do is go to their website, which is retrobat.org, and then follow the download prompts. Now they are hosting this on an external website called itch.io. This is a place that holds a lot of indie software. And when you get to the download page, it's going to give you an option to donate to the development team if you would like. And this is all totally optional, and the software is totally free. So if you don't have the means to pay for it, you can just click on the no thanks, just take me to the downloads. And once you get here, I would recommend downloading the most recent release, which is 6.4.0 stable, at least as of today. The download itself might take a while. It's going to be over a gig in total size, so just kind of kick back and wait. Once it's done, navigate to wherever you save that file and then double click it to open. And depending on your version of Windows as well as your security settings, you might get one of these prompts. If you do, no big deal. Just click on that thing that says more info and then go down to run anyway. And then this will start the installation process. And it will ask you where you want to install Retrobat. You can put this anywhere you want. We're just going to throw ours directly onto the C drive. After that, you'll go through a bunch of different installation prompts, including a bunch of prompts to install things like DirectX, as well as some runtimes. And each time one of these pop up, just go ahead and confirm it. It's going to take a few minutes to kind of go through this whole process. And once you're done, it's going to say that they've completed setting up installation, so you can hit finish. And from there, you should have a desktop shortcut for Retrobat. Let's go ahead and double click on it to open. It's going to give you a quick randomized video, and then you will be within the Retrobat interface. And like I mentioned in the intro, this is using an emulation station frontend, so it may be very familiar if you've ever tried one of these before. Now, Retrobat on its own doesn't come with any games. There are a couple like freeware games as examples, but nothing other than that. We have to add our own stuff. And so that's going to be the next part of this process. Let's press the Start button to bring up the main menu, and then we'll go down to Quit. And this will immediately kill the app and bring us back to our Windows interface. So now let's go ahead and start adding our game files. We'll go into this PC in our Windows C drive, and then within there, you will find that Retrobat folder. Now within the Retrobat folder, there are only really two folders that you need to pay attention to. The first will be called BIOS, and the other one will be called ROMs. And let's go into the BIOS folder and start talking about that one first. Now BIOS files are system files that are required for only certain systems to run properly, and it can get very confusing which BIOS files you need and where to put them. Thankfully, Retrobat makes it pretty easy because they all just go in this folder. I've gone ahead and made an entire list of the most common BIOS files and the names for them and where they need to be placed. Now BIOS files, like game files, are copyrighted, so I'm not going to share how to find them, so you're going to be on your own. But at the very least, when you do find these files, look for those that match these exact file names. And also note that some of these BIOS locations are going to be a little bit unique. For example, with Dreamcast, they have to go in their own folder labeled DC. And so everything that has a somewhat different location is going to be highlighted in this peach color. And of note, many of your favorite systems won't require BIOS files at all. For example, Nintendo GameCube, you don't have to add anything. This is really only going to come into play for the systems that you see here and a couple that are more obscure. Now, if you're still not sure which files are going to be needed for each system, then you have another great resource. That's going to be the Retrobat wiki page. If you scroll down on the left, under the Systems and Emulators section, you'll see one that says Supported Game Systems. And bringing up this page will give you a full table of every system that they support. So if you are looking to play a certain system, I would scroll through this table and then click on the link to see more about it. We're going to go back to Dreamcast to have a look here. And you're going to find a lot of information. For example, the exact location of where the folder is to put all the ROMs. And if you scroll down a little bit more, you'll see more information about BIOS. And so if you want to specifically see which files and where they go, this is a great way to do that too. And finally, before we move on to the games files, there's one other place you can check out for your BIOS files as well. If we go back into the C drive and then the Retrobat folder again, there's an app called Bat GUI. And there's a bunch of things that we can do here. It's a little bit more of an advanced feature, but one of the things I really like about it is the BIOS checker. So here you can scan your BIOS folder and it'll let you know which BIOS files are missing and the exact name and MD5 hash file needed. And so this is yet another way to check on all those BIOS files. I know I'm spending a lot of time with this, but these can be pretty important for certain systems. And so long story short, to get all these systems running properly, you are going to need these BIOS files. And hopefully this list will be pretty helpful in getting you set up. Okay, now that we've covered the BIOS folder, let's talk about the ROMs folder. This is where we're going to put all of our game files. If we open up that ROMs folder, we're going to see a full list of all these systems that are supported. And if you have any question about which folder goes where, I would recommend going back to that wiki page. I will have a link down below. So here it's going to be a pretty easy process. You just have to drag and drop your game files from one folder to the other. So for example, on the right window here, I've got an external SSD that's got all my games on it. So I'm just going to move those over into my Retrobat ROMs folder. This can be a pretty tedious process depending on the games that you want. So just kind of go through one by one and then add everything. And of course, you can always add and remove any of these games at any time, and Retrobat will pick up on that. When it comes down to it, this will probably be the longest part of the entire process, finding the games and then adding them to their respective folder. But once you've got it done, it's going to be pretty easy after that. So let's assume that you have now added all your games files, you've got the proper BIOS files in the BIOS folder, and we are ready to actually start using Retrobat. And now when we open up the app again, you will see that the folders will be populated and we can navigate through the user interface and actually see these other systems. From there, we can press on the A button on our controller to bring up the games list, and this is where we can navigate through and then launch a game. And like I mentioned, Retrobat already comes pre-configured, so not only when you launch the game will all the controls work, but you will also have these nice borders around the game depending on what you're playing. And so here with Earthworm Jim, I've got this nice Sega Genesis border. Now let's say that you're done playing the game and you're ready to quit out. That's when you're going to use a hotkey to exit the game. And I think this is a great time to talk about hotkeys in general. And so here's a quick diagram that I made that will show you the most common Retrobat hotkeys. The number one thing to keep in mind is the hotkey enable button, which in most controllers is going to be the select button. You're going to want to press on this first and then any of the other buttons to actually enable the hotkey. So for example, if we want to quit a game, we're going to hold down select and press on start. Same thing if we want to save a state, we're going to hold select and then press that save state button. And then of course, same process with the load state button and so on. For me personally, I only really use the quit game, save state, load state, and fast forward toggles. Those are the ones that I use the most. And so as an example here, say I'm done playing Earthworm Jim, I'm going to hold down select and press start and it'll quit the game and boot me back into the menu. And really, fundamentally, that's all it really takes when it comes to launching a game, but there is quite a few configurations that we can do to make things even better. So we're going to dive into that next. Let's start with just the background music. By default, Retrobat is going to play a bunch of music, and you may not like this. Thankfully, it's very easy to disable this if you would like. Press the start button, then go down into sound settings. From there, navigate down to front end music, and then toggle it off. And once you leave the menu, the music will die and you'll be good to go. Now, another thing you may want to try out is different themes to give a different look and feel to Retrobat as a whole. To bring this up, we're going to press the start button again to get into the main menu and then scroll down to updates and downloads. And from there, you'll find a section called themes. We'll go into that. And this is going to give us a huge variety of themes that we can choose from, and we can download them directly from this menu. So I would recommend just kind of scrolling through, find anything that you think looks pretty good and then choose it. I'm going to download this one. It's called Artbook Next. It's one of my favorites. Now, once the download is complete, we'll go back to the main menu and then go into user interface settings. From there, the top option will be theme set and we can choose whatever we would like. Let's switch over to the Artbook Next ES one. And so there we go. We now have a completely different look when it comes to scrolling through our games. I think it looks great. Let's go back to the theme downloaders and try one more. Let's do this one called Canvas. I really like this one because it does change the overall feel of Emulation Station. So again, once we've downloaded that, we'll go into the user interface settings, theme set, and then now change it to Canvas. And so now instead of moving left and right to go through all our systems, we have a grid kind of interface. And depending on what you're looking for with these types of games, you might like this one better. Another thing worth noting is that you can go in and configure each of these themes as well. So let's go back into the main menu, then user interface settings, and now go into theme configuration. In this example, there are two things that I like to change. The first is going to be the system icon style. Right now it's set to art, but let's change it to icons and check it out. Now when we go back to the theme, you can see that it's just showing all of the console icons or controllers, and I think this looks pretty great. This gives it a more simple and kind of focused experience, so I like that. Now the other thing I like to change within this theme configuration is going to be the color scheme. We've got about 10 of them to choose from, and I think my favorite is the retro one. And so this is what it looks like now that we've changed it, and I like this. It's a lot brighter, but then also simple and focused, so you've got a lot of things to choose from. Long story short, I would recommend experimenting with these different themes because you might find one that's a perfect fit for you. Now let's talk a little bit about media as well as box art. If we open up the games list, you can see that we don't have any sort of media. It just shows the games in a text list. What we need to do now is add all the box art to all of our games, which is actually a pretty easy process. We're going to press start again to get into the main menu, and this time we're going to go into the section called Scraper. From there, go into the Scraper settings and then navigate all the way down to the bottom. You will see a username and password section. And for this, we need to set up an account with screenscraper.fr. It's completely free to register, and once you have that username and password, just make sure you remember them because we have to add them into Retrobat. And so after we've added our username and password, we're about good to go. I think that all these default settings are very good. The only one I would consider turning on is going to be the bezel 16:9 function. If you turn this on, when you scrape all of your media, it's going to actually scrape borders that are individual for each of your games. And I'll show this off here in a moment, but if you want personalized borders around each of your games, then I would recommend turning this on. After that, let's go back to the main Scraper menu and then now go into the Systems Included and make sure that you've checked all the games that you want to actually scrape. So here I'm going to go down to Select All, and that'll include everything. After that, we can hit Scrape Now, and it's going to go through the process of finding and downloading all of your box art. And depending on the size of your library, this may take some time. For me, it took about 20 minutes with about 600 games. Once the download is complete, go ahead and press Start to get back into the main menu, and then go into Game Settings and Update Games List. And that's going to refresh Emulation Station, and now when we go through the games list, you can see that we have this beautiful media. In addition, if we hover over a game for a few seconds, it'll actually start playing a video to give us an idea of what the game's going to be like. So at this point, we've got a pretty good setup. We have additional themes that we can try out, and we also have all of our game media, which means that as we navigate through, it's going to be personalized and it's all going to look great. Let's actually start up a few games and see what it's going to look like within Retrobat and why I think this is a really great setup. Number one, I love these individual game bezels. I think it looks really cool to be able to have these borders around our systems that were 4x3. This means that instead of having these plain old black borders when trying to play 4x3 systems, we now get something that's a little bit more tailored to the game itself. And so in particular, when it comes to playing retro games, I think this is a really great solution just because it looks so cool and very personalized. Now, that being said, depending on the systems that you're trying to emulate, this may not actually be something that you want. Let's use PlayStation 2 as our example because this is a little bit more of a robust setup. For example, this runs a standalone emulator outside of RetroArch, which most of the other retro systems use. And the first time that you try to launch a PS2 game, it's going to prompt you to download and install that specific emulator. And once you go through that process, the game will launch. Now, like with the retro systems, this one did download those bezels, and so I have this 16:9 box art around God of War 2. However, this is a game that plays in a 16:9 format, and so rather than play it in 4x3, I'd rather just fill up the whole screen. So in this case, we want to disable the border and then also add widescreen hacks to be able to blow it up to the full screen. So this time what we're going to do is press Start to bring up the main menu, and now we're going to go into Game Settings. And there at the very bottom, we'll find Per System Advanced Configuration. And essentially, this is going to list out all the systems that we have games for in Retrobat, and we'll be able to go and configure them all individually. So let's go down to PlayStation 2, and this is going to be the menu here to adjust the settings for this emulator. For example, if we don't like the default emulator, which is PCSX2, we can try out different ones to see what is going to be a better fit for us. I personally like the standard PCSX2, so that's the one I'm going to use. Now what we're going to do here is set our shaders as well as our decorations to none. That's going to remove all the bezels and overlays and everything else so that we have just a clean image. In addition, I want to change out the game aspect ratio from the standard 4x3 over to 16:9. And many games on PS2 will just natively support 16:9, but others will not, and so we'll have to enable some widescreen hacks. So we'll do that here in a moment, but also while we're here, let's go down to internal resolution. This is where we can upscale our games. By default, it's just going to be the native resolution, but if you have a more powerful PC like the one I'm using, I'm going to bump it up to an X3 resolution. This means the games are going to play at a 1080p, and they're going to look amazing, almost like remastered versions of the same game. And then finally, we'll go into the advanced then video section. Here we'll find our widescreen patches, so we'll turn this on. I also like to use the setting below it, the no interlacing patches, so I'm going to turn this on as well. And so there we go. Now anytime we open up a PS2 game, it's going to play it in full screen 16:9 and then apply any sort of widescreen patches as well. It's also going to upscale the resolution to 1080p, so all the games are going to look very sharp and crisp. And so when it comes down to it, certain systems will work well just with the default settings, but others you may have to make a couple adjustments to within the Per System Advanced configuration. And it's really going to depend on the game system that you're playing as well as your own individual preferences. preferences. Let's use GameCube as our next example. Here I'm playing Soul Calibur 2, and I think it looks pretty great in 4:3 with the nice GameCube bezels around the side. And so you may want to just leave it as it is, but let's say that there's one certain game where you just doesn't think it looks right. So with Alien Hominid, you're thinking to yourself, actually this would look better with just black bars. So let me show you how to change this on a per game basis instead of just every GameCube game. We're going to go back into the main menu, and then when you hover over the game, press and hold the A button to bring up this side menu. From here, scroll down until you find that Advanced Game Options. This is going to look almost identical to the advanced system configuration that we were just doing, but it'll only affect Alien Hominid, that one game. And so here, I'm going to turn off the decorations. That's going to remove those bezels on the left and right. And now when we jump into the game, we're just going to have these clean black bars. So it's all really going to be up to what you prefer for each game. Let's do a couple more examples just to give you an idea of what you may prefer over what you won't. Let's start with a Game Boy game, and I think these actually look pretty good. It's going to look like a Game Boy around the sides of it, and everything will be nice and centered. However, the games are going to run in black and white by default, so let's go ahead and change that. We're going to go back into that per system advanced configuration, and then under Game Boy, you'll see an option that says shader set. And for this, we're going to change it to handheld, which will apply to a bunch of different systems. Now, when we open up that same Game Boy game, we're going to get that nice Game Boy DMG border, but then also the game itself is going to look nice and green, and it's just going to look really fitting. And so personally, I think this looks pretty cool. So this is how I play my Game Boy games. We can use that same handheld shader for other game systems as well. For example, this is what Game Boy Color looks. Again, I think this looks pretty cool. However, there might be some that you don't like. For example, with Game Boy Advance, I don't like the borders here. I think it makes the screen image just a little bit too small. Game Boy Advance was a system that originally ran at a 3:2 aspect ratio, which means it's pretty close to widescreen. So I'd rather just see as much screen as possible. So in this case, under shader set, I'm going to set it to none. And now when we launch the game, we're going to get those clean black borders like we had with GameCube, and I think it looks pretty great. Another system that I'm not so hot about when it comes to decorations and bezels are going to be arcade games. I don't mind the fact that we have these bezels on the left and right, but it makes the screen image a little bit too small for me. And so again here, under the per system advanced configuration, we're going to turn both the shader set and the decorations off. And now when we start up the game, we're not going to have those bezels on the left and right, which I thought were pretty cool, but at least now we have a full screen image. So again, it's really going to come down to what you prefer over the other, but that's how you will configure it either way. Okay, now that we've got our games configured, I want to show off two other things that might be important for you. The first is to set up multiple controllers. Say, for example, you want to have a multiplayer session. First thing you want to do is connect your controllers to the computer, and now we want to assign each player to each controller. For this, we're going to press Start, go into the main menu, and go into Controller Settings. And then down below, you'll see a section that says Controller Priority. And so here you can assign each controller to each player. Now I've only got one controller hooked up right now, but you can see that I can go in and select it. And theoretically, you can set up to 8 controllers at a time if you've got all the hookups or Bluetooth connection for it. And then finally, the last setting that I would recommend checking out is going to be under Updates and Downloads. And within here, you can actually update Retrobat itself. So you can go down here under Software Updates, and you can check for updates and then start the update as well. And so this will make sure that you have the most recent version of each emulator and configuration from the Retrobat team. Okay, I think that's about it when it comes to configuration. We are now set up to be able to enjoy just about every single game that Retrobat supports. So let me show you one other thing in case you are planning on playing this on a Windows PC where you're also going to be playing your Steam games. I'm going to show you how to add Retrobat to your Steam library, so that way you can just launch it directly from Steam. So first thing, make sure that you have Steam open in just the regular mode, and then on the bottom left, you'll see an option that says Add a Game. And within the drop-down menu, select the one that says Add a non-Steam game. From there, you can just scroll down and you should see Retrobat right there. So you can just check it and then select Add Selected Programs. And so there we go. Now within our games list, we can find Retrobat. We can press the play button and it'll start the game right up. And so this is a very easy way to just jump in and out of your retro games without having to do any further configuration. Now, one thing you may notice as you navigate through your home menu is that Retrobat doesn't have any fancy box art like your other games that are in your system. So let me show you really quickly how to add that as well. It's a little bit of a tedious process, but once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy. To do this, we're going to go to a website called steamgriddb.com. And within the search bar, just search for the word Retrobat and you'll pull up Retrobat Emulator 2019. From there, you'll see a bunch of different art that you can use for Retrobat, and we're going to download one of each of these. So I'm going to start with the vertical one right here. I'm going to click on it and then go Save Image As. I'm going to also give this a link so I know which one is which. So I'm going to type the word vertical in here. Next, we'll do this horizontal game image, which they often will call a grid. So I'm going to do the download, then save image as, and then I'm going to add the word grid in front of it. And then finally, after that, we've got one that's called a hero or a background. So I'm going to click on this one here, and then same thing, download, save image as, and I'm going to put the word BG in front of it for background. And then finally, on the very bottom, you'll see one that's called a logo. So let's click on this one. Again, we're going to save this image, and I'm going to put the word logo in front of it. And now that we've downloaded those 4 types of images, we're going to go ahead and add each of these as custom art. So we're going to go back to our Steam library, and because we just opened up Retrobat, it's going to be listed as our most recent game. And you can see here that we have this horizontal box art. Now we're going to right click on this empty space and then go into manage, and then we're going to set custom artwork. From there, go to wherever you downloaded your image file and then select the one that says grid. And there we go. We've now have this nice Retrobat logo right here on our computer. Now, if we click on Retrobat, you will see there's some other empty spaces. Now we're going to add those. We're going to right click here and then select set custom background. And you probably guessed it, we're going to pick the image that we labeled as BG. On top of that, we can also set that custom logo. So we're going to right click, set custom logo, and then pick that one. And look at that. I think that looks pretty freaking awesome. So the next thing we need to do is add that vertical box art in case the game itself is not our very first or leftmost position. And to get to that, it's pretty easy. You just need to launch any other game so that Retrobat is no longer the one on the far left. And so after you've launched a game and the game starts up, you can just immediately quit it. And now when we go back to our Steam library menu, you can see that there's Retrobat, but it doesn't have any art. Same thing, we're going to right click on this, then manage, and then set custom box art. And this time we're going to pick our vertical option. And there we go. We've now added all the possible box art for Retrobat within Steam. And I think this looks really good, especially if you're going to be using Steam within big picture mode. So here I am kind of scrolling through and I can see Retrobat and all my other games, and then I can pick it and then launch it from here. And so this is a really neat way to be able to integrate the entire Retrobat experience into Steam, or of course you can just launch it from your desktop as well. And so there we go. That's basically everything you need to know when it comes to setting up Retrobat. There are still some advanced configurations you can do, but I think this is enough to make you really dangerous. And like I said, the beauty of Retrobat is the fact that it's so easy to set up that you don't really have to do all this configuration if you don't want to. I think this is probably the easiest one-stop solution when it comes to emulating games on Windows. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. Have you used Retrobat before, or are you going to try it out now? As always, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.